Hi, I'm Howlett, and we're going to take a few minutes today and talk about endings, ending songs. Now, I'm referring to something that we call tagging, and tagging basically means repeating a little bit of a song at the end just to make it sound a little more planned, a little more arranged. We've all seen the scenarios where somebody will just go up and sing a song out of the hymnal, and it sort of feels like it's thrown together. Tagging is just something you can do either on the spur of the moment or plan to make the song sound a little less like it was just thrown together. So it's a little thing that you can do. It's an easy thing to do, and I want to talk about it for a few minutes today. There's a couple of different scenarios we have to run through in regards to tagging, because here's the critical thing you have to understand. When you're tagging, you're going back to a point in the song, and you have to know the chord that you're going back to. Okay, there's a couple of different options. The most common, of course, are 1, 4, and 5. 90% of the time, you're going to go back to one of those or something that will substitute for one of those. So we really want to focus on those three different scenarios. You have to do different things for each one. You have to know where you're going, or you're going to get hung out to dry. You'll do for example, you might do a deceptive cadence, which we'll talk about in a second. And then you'll find yourself going back to a chord that does not lead naturally into. So, know where you're going. Again, three different scenarios. Let me give you examples really quick. Sometimes you go back to the one chord. For example, Jesus Paid It All. And then let's say we're going back to the one chord again. Well, we're going to repeat the last line. We're going back to the right back to the E flat chord. Okay, so that's an example of going back to the one chord. On the key of E flat, we go back to the phrase. It starts on one chord, E flat. Okay, sometimes you might go back to a 4 chord, Sweet Hour of Prayer. And then maybe you're going to go back to the okay, so you go back to the 4 chord again. That's an example of moving to a 4. And then sometimes, actually most commonly, you're going to move to a 5 chord. For example, the song At the Cross. And let's just say we're going to repeat that. Going back to a 5, you see that as a B flat chord. Okay, so you have those three different scenarios. Let's talk about what you do in each scenario. And we'll start with the last one I just played because it's the most common and it's also the most complicated. If you're going back to a 5 chord, the deceptive cadence is available to you. Now, if you studied classical music, you know the deceptive cadence is going to a 6 instead of a 1. We call it a false ending. That's why it's called deceptive, because people expect you to end the song. You go to a deceptive cadence, and basically that means, okay, we're not going to end the song yet. And basically all you do is you substitute a minor 6 for the 1 chord. It would sound like this. Now I'm supposed to go to E flat here, right? But instead I'm going to go to C minor. Okay, so I'm going to C minor. Now, the reason the deceptive cadence works really well is because it naturally leads to the 2 chord, which is also the 5 chord, or it leads to the 5 chord. So you see how if you're going back to a 5 chord, if you're starting your tag on a 5 chord, the 6 chord is a great place to be because the 6 chord naturally leads to the 2, which naturally leads to the 5, like this. There's your 2, and there's your 5. Okay? So here's how it would sound. By the way, instead of going back to the 5, I'm usually going to change that to a 2-5 progression. Okay? So, I'm going to play, instead of this, I'm not going to play that. That's a 5 chord. I'm going to do this instead. F minor, which is your 2 chord, and then 5. Okay? Now, let's do the deceptive cadence in front of that. I went to the 6 chord, and now that leads to the 2 chord. See how easy that is? So you go minor 6 and then change the 5 chord into a 2-5 progression. Okay, now let's do that. Let me give you a few little variations. If you go to, instead of going to a 6th chord, you can actually go to the chord in front of the 6th chord, and you can change the 6th chord into a progression. The chord that naturally fits in front of a 6th chord is the 3 chord, because the 3 chord also will resolve down a 5th to the 6th chord. So, I know this is a little fast. If you're really lost, get my course on theory or reharmonization, and I'll cover these things. They're not hard, but you do need to know chord numbers. Okay, so we're going to go to the 3 chord, and then we're going to resolve it to 6. Okay, so here's how it sounds. Where am I going? To the 3 chord, which is G minor 7. And then I'm going to resolve down to C minor 7. And then I'm going to go to my 2, which is F minor 5. See how that works? So it's just a little more to it, a little fancier. If you play that and the singer is singing tonic, which they normally are, on the last note of the song, they may have to switch, but you'll hear them do it. They do it. It just happens spontaneously. They'll hear, oh, I need to get off this note, and they'll usually move up to this note. Okay, now, there's one other little quick twist on that I want to show you, because I do this probably more than anything. I'll play, instead of playing a minor 6, I substitute a secondary dominant there, the 6-7, which is this 5 of 2. So instead of playing C minor 7, I'm going to play a dominant C chord. So I'm going to play this instead. Okay, it sounds like this. So you don't change the numbers. You still play 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. You're just changing that 6th chord from minor to dominant. You can get a little bit flashy with it as well if you move to a dominant chord. You have more options for color. So there you have it. 3 little things you can do in the case of a 6th chord. Now, let's go on really quick and talk about a couple other scenarios. If you're going back to a 1 chord, like we were talking about, Jesus Paid It All. Ending on a 1 chord, and then we're starting the next phrase on a 1 chord. So you don't really like that. It doesn't really sound that good. You're staying on a 1 too much. So what do? Well, basically, we're just going to insert a secondary dominant, not a secondary dominant. We're going to insert a suspended 5 chord in the middle. This is your classic 4/5 chord. You play 5 in the bass, 4 chord over top of it, A flat over B flat in this case. Okay, so let's do that again, a little bit slower. Let's just start. 4/5. So there's a lot of different ways you can make that work. You can elongate it if you want. Okay, so you hear I just changed, I basically threw an extra bar or two, just sort of really milking that suspended dominant for everything it's worth. The reason it works so well is because the suspended dominant loves to resolve to 1. So basically you stick that chord in there and then it immediately generates some tension that you're leading back to something. And you're leading back to that 1 chord. Easy. Easy to do. You can use that anytime you're going back to a 1. Now let's talk about one other scenario, which is going back to a 4 chord. if you're moving from the end of a song back to a tag that starts on a 4 chord, the good news is you don't have to do anything. 1 to 4 is a very, very natural movement. Sounds great. You don't have to do anything. Here's an example. And then you're going back to the 4 chord. Okay, really, really simple to do that particular one. So hopefully that helps you. Again, you need to do when you're moving back to a 5, do the deceptive cadence idea. Either go to 6, 3, or 3 to 6. And then with the 1 chord, insert that suspended dominant. Going back to a 4 chord, you don't have to do anything. So you can use that next time you have to play in church for somebody, or if you're just doing an arrangement for yourself. I'm Greg Howlett, and I'll see you next time.